Samigos, it is your favorite Illustrator slash devilishly handsome and mysterious masked rogue. Today I'm actually doing my job as an illustrator and creating a show poster from start to finish. I'm going to show my whole process, from research to thumbnailing to sketching, and then to the final design. The play itself is called Bamboozled. It's a commedia dell'arte kind of play, which is characterized by the use of masks and a whole lot of slapstick comedy. And ordinarily at this stage, I'd just go online and read the spark notes or see if I could find a performance of it somewhere, but this is a lesser known play, so luckily I have the backup plan of having the script right here. So let's get to reading, shall we? After reading the script, I now have a pretty good idea of where I'd like to go with the final piece. Bamboozled is essentially about a group of people trying to trick an old miser named Pantalone into marrying the wrong person so that the beautiful Columbine can run away with her young lover. Then the scammers can acquire the dowry money and escape to live new lives. The group is led by the greatest trickster of all, Brigella, but Pantalone is aware he's being conned, so he plans to trick them the day of the wedding. It's a battle of bamboozler versus bamboozler, with marital bliss on the line. To keep with this plot, the elements I want to include in the poster are things that'll indicate the genre of the play, so masks and a harlequin pattern with some circus font imagery, and things that will indicate the plot of the play, so a little bit of trickery and maybe some wedding imagery. The design that I settled on for my thumbnails has a masked trickster with a finger to his lips with a wedding design on his mask. I wanted it to have sort of a bombastic circus energy, so you'll see I use a Venice Carnival type color palette later on. I included a lot of advertising design elements into this that you'd see in more old-fashioned posters so that it has that kind of retro feel, since this is a very ancient form of theater. And it also has a pretty big focus on symmetry, so we can keep everything really wonky while still having that through line. I find it very helpful to kind of balance symmetry versus asymmetry in designs like this. It tends to really attract the eye, I've found. At this point, I'm doing a fun little trick in which I just sort of flat out everything, but I do it on separate layers. So the mask is on a separate layer, the face is on a separate layer, the font is on a separate layer. You'll have to forgive me for blocking out some of the text here. I don't want to dox my clients, as Karina would say. But by flatting out the layers in this way, I can just alpha lock the layer and then paint directly on it, which is incredibly convenient. I was considering how much I wanted to make this mask look, dramatic. I almost molded it so that it had a plague doctor sort of shape, so it was very 3D. Right, and then I wrote yikes on the dude's face because he looks very, very scary without the mask. But in the end, I realized that since I was putting a lot of design elements on the mask anyway, having too much detail would just get in the way of that. An important part of making art is balancing the areas of detail with the areas of rest. So if you want people to look in a certain location, you're going to put more of a concentration of details there. But if your whole piece has a concentration of details, then your viewer will have no idea where to look. It's like putting exclamation points everywhere in your text. No one's gonna know what part's actually important. As you can see, I consider myself to be a bit of a maniac when it comes to coloring, so I pretty much colored this instantly, compared to how long it took for me to sketch the actual design. Similar to including too much detail, my first run had a little bit too much color. There was too much variety of colors, so it clashed quite a bit and made it, again, really difficult to tell where you were supposed to be looking. I used a gradient map to unify all the colors down to a specific palette though, and I think that this works a lot better. I'm using sort of a split complementary palette with purple and pink and then a bright golden yellow, so that I can have a maximum amount of contrast while still sticking primarily to like warm, fun circus tones. And then also I just blasted out like the best hand I've ever drawn. That was a really good hand, real proud of that one. So here I'm refining the details. I have that on a separate clipping mask so that I can erase and redo any elements that I need to, and so that I can change the colors with ease. Always a good idea to put things like that on separate layers. For some reason, I like spent ages looking at like circus themed fonts and couldn't find any that I liked. So you can see me committing the general witchcraft that is designing one's own font. I really like how it turned out. It's sort of like a very classic black letter block font, but it still has these little curves to it that you wouldn't get with an ordinary one. So it has sort of an odd, fun flow to it that I think really fits the vibe of the play. Then I got the idea to riff off a bulletin board with a lot of little designs and post-it notes. So I incorporated these fun, kind of overlapping, messy shapes into the poster design as a way to make the text stand out. I thought about warping the text a bit more, maybe having it like lean off the edges, but in the end I decided that wasn't necessary. Then finally, I'm blasting off into the final touches. I stuck an overlay on top of it so that it would look more like a traditional poster and add a little bit of texture and visual interest, and then actually added the wedding figures because I literally forgot about them. That's the end of my first run, so I'm gonna go ahead and send this version to the client and see if there's anything she'd like me to change. Be right back. Alright, so I got back to the client with this design. She really liked it, which is great, but she also got back to me with a correction on the showtime dates, which means I have to change this part right down here. So that's why, my friends, you always keep a working copy where you can turn off certain layers and just not have to worry about the absolute nonsense that comes with recreating your layers. Alright, I fixed it. Figured out it'd be easier if I just split the times up into two separate little rows there, and then made the PM symbols real small so that I had room for the font. By the way, in case you're wondering how I got such a beautiful rounded rectangle in Procreate, it's actually really simple. All you have to do is take a hard brush, preferably one without too much size variation, and I'll show you why in a minute, and you just draw a shape, hold it, and then Procreate will automatically turn it into a shape for you, while keeping those rounded edges that you would have with a more traditional rounded rectangle. The reason why you don't want to do this with a brush with a lot of variation is because then your shape will end up with a lot of variation. It'll be super obvious. So, as an example, let's just make a quick little guy here. Bam. Now that's a polyline, but all you gotta do is drag one of the lines over a bit, and then bam. Ya boy, it's a rounded rectangle. Alright, there we go. Let me show you how I organized my layers for this one. I'm just gonna turn everything off real quick so that we can go through. As you can see, these are my thumbnails. I went for this third guy right here. So then this was my initial sketch. Pretty early on, I decided that I'd turn the double O's into rings. I thought that was a really cute idea. I am a little bit worried that people will start reading it as like Bamb 8-zold. But we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. Here's my initial run with the font. Looks really nice, all clean like this, huh? Then I built a little harlequin pattern, filled it with fun colors, and then warped it. I warped it for a couple of reasons. One, so that it would draw your eye in towards the subject, rather than like create sort of a stationary type piece. Here's my border. I have my person, who, by the way, looks absolutely terrifying without a mask because of the shadows. Like, this is a demon. You put the mask on, and it makes a lot more sense. So let's pop the hand back in, shall we? There we go. Lot less terrifying. Then I added the outline. You see that, like, without it, the face kind of just gets absorbed into the general chaos of the harlequin pattern. By adding this sort of fun halo effect, not only does it make it look a bit less like a severed head just floating there, it also brings the design inward. Then I have the design element on the mask on a separate overlay layer. Have all of my text layers, which again I won't show because I don't want to dox my clients, but I can show this much. Ta-da! I put a slight warp on it so that it kind of follows the shape of the mask more closely, which is nice. And then bam, my cool font bit. And then right up at the very top here, I have some little effect layers that create the illusion that this is actually a printed poster, which is kind of a funny thing for me to do because it will be printed, but it has that kind of look that it's been like faded and spotted by time. But yeah, my thought process with the composition, as human beings, the first thing we're going to tend to look at is the eyes. From the eyes, you're going to follow this line of the mask down to the hand, but then, since as humans, we're sort of programmed to follow pointing fingers, you might go right back up and then see, wham bam, the title. But since we also have all these leading lines going back down, which is compounded by the harlequin pattern in the background, your gaze gets just blasted back down here. So ideally, this is a poster that grabs you by the throat, shakes you, tells you what the title is, and then tells you where you can go to see it if you want to be shaken around by the throat some more. And all the while it looks at you with these pretty, pretty little eyes. The last step I'm going to do is to grab white and just completely delete my art. No, not the case. Since this is going to be printed, the final colors are going to be a lot darker once they have gone through the printer. So I'm just going to go through and lighten everything. Obviously, this won't be in the final digital version, but when you're printing things out physically, it's a good thing to do. Another way to do this, if you use Photoshop, is just to increase the exposure, but there's no good exposure tool in Procreate, so this is the little workaround that I found for that. I'm gonna shoot the final version off to my client, and we'll see how it goes. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to hit that like button and maybe subscribe. It helps my channel out a lot. I'm still just a little guy, so any tiny crumbs of your attention that you give me, I will gladly consume and become stronger and a more powerful YouTuber who can continue to make videos you'll enjoy. I and these devilishly beautiful eyes will see you next time. Adios!